Now, let's begin a whole new avenue of escapes from the rear mounted position. Let's first start off with Mateus behind me. In a seated situation, Mateus has two hooks in, like so, and he has a variety of grips he can employ. Here he's chosen one of the most popular grips in the modern sport of jiu-jitsu, that's often referred to as a seatbelt grip. Okay, obviously he has other alternatives here because I'm wearing a jacket. You can also fix onto my lapels and go for strangleholds. He can get a hold of my wrist, just like so, and fix onto a lapel. There's a whole bunch of different options he's got. We'll be looking at all of these. Now, once someone goes behind me in a situation like this, the onus is on me to get out of this position and either break contact completely or go back to some form of guard. The more conservative option in these situations is to put your opponent back in guard. I believe it's a very good option, and it's the one we'll be focusing on most. So in fact, it's actually a variation of an elbow escape. The main difference is because my opponent is behind me instead of on top of me, I will be sliding to one side or the other and then elbow escaping. So the idea is I will slide to an angle where my opponent is now forced to try to climb back on top of me to recover position. And I will perform an elbow escape to put him back in guard. So we often refer to this kind of escape as a sliding elbow escape. It's the same elbow escape that we saw earlier in all the other escape elements, but preceded by a slide, so that we take a situation where he was behind me to one where he gets back in front of me. Once he's in front of me, then we can elbow escape again. But we've got to slide to take him from behind to back to front. Now, this general position is complicated by the fact that not only am I trying to escape a position, but very often at the same time, I'm also trying to escape a submission. In this case, it's going to be a grip here and here, where my opponent can potentially strangle me. Okay. Now let's come closer to the camera and let's understand something a little bit about strangulations with a jacket that becomes very important. Let's have Mateus sitting here. Let's understand that when we go to strangle with a gi, the key to my strangulation is that ultimately my elbow of my strangle hand must go behind Mateus's shoulder. Okay. Do you see how my elbow is sliding behind his shoulder? Only when my elbow goes behind the shoulder can I start to enact a strangulation upon my opponent. If Mateus was able to seize me here at the jacket and then here at the gi and pull my elbow in front of his shoulder, then I would not be able to complete the strangle. Even though I have a good grip on my training partner's lapel, I can't complete the strangle because Mateus is holding my elbow in front of his shoulder. If he ever let go of my tricep, then it would be very easy for me to go into the strangulation position and get a submission hold. So there's a real sense here in which there's a battle for elbow position. Mateus wants to grip my jacket and pull my elbow in front of his shoulder and keep it there. And then the best lapel grip in the world won't help me. I won't be able to strangle him. I, on the other hand, am always looking to deny him control of my elbow and tricep, so that when we go to strangle, my elbow is behind his shoulder where he can't access it, and as a result, I can strangle for the finish. So there's this element here where, come behind me, buddy. Not only am I struggling to get out of the general position, that's a battle for my opponent's hooks, okay? So I need to battle these hooks, and I need to battle his chest on back position. That's one element. That's the positional battle that's going on here, okay? So the positional battle is a battle for my opponent's feet, which are hooked into my hips, and a battle for his chest position on my back. I'm going to look to fight him at the feet and the chest to back connection. And at the same time, I've got to fight the strangle at the elbow, where I'm consistently looking to keep his elbow in front of my shoulder. He, on the other hand, is consistently looking to get the elbow behind the shoulder, and you can hear me strangling as a result of that. So we always look to get our various grips in on our training partner, and from here we keep the elbow in front. Okay? If my opponent's hands are locked in a seatbelt grip, then I don't need to worry about a strangle because he's merely holding the position. In these circumstances, I generally counsel people to take an inside thumb grip. So when he locks his seatbelt, my thumb is inside his wrist. That means if Mateus goes to switch to a stranglehold on my lapels, it's difficult and I've got an excellent ability to prevent him from getting through to a lapel. So once again, let's come closer to the camera and understand exactly what's going on here. What is the battleground that we're fighting over when someone takes our back under these circumstances? Whenever someone takes my back in these circumstances, there's two distinct battles going on. One is positional and one is a submission battle. The positional battle is over my opponent's feet and his chest to back positioning. If I can get his chest off my back and start getting feet out of position, you're winning the positional battle. But even as we're fighting that battle, there's also the potential for a submissions battle at the same time. If his hands are locked in a seatbelt grip, then it's just a positional element. Okay. Now I take my thumb, I put it inside his wrist. If he goes to switch to a stranglehold, it's going to be difficult now because my thumb is in the inside position, and it'll be relatively easy for us to break grips and move on out. But if my opponent does get a hold of the lapel in a way where he can begin to strangle me, then it becomes a subtle battle for elbow position. I'm always going to be looking to take his elbow in front of my shoulder, and from here keep it in position. So when he goes to strangle me, it's a very difficult thing. You can hear, even as he closes his elbow behind me, my voice is not strangling. If I lose control of the elbow, you can hear immediately my voice sounds like I've inhaled helium. That's the sound that a strangle is being applied successfully. So always our thing when he's got strangulation grips is to control our training partner's gi sleeve and maintain the elbow in front of our shoulder. So there's that battle for elbow position once my opponent establishes strangulation grips. So those are our two battlegrounds: the positional battle over feet and chest to back positioning, and the submissions battle to either take inside thumb position if he has a seatbelt so he can't switch to a submission hold, or if he's actually got a submission hold, then it's a different form of battle where we're consistently keeping his elbow in front of our shoulder so we don't get strangled right from the start. Let's start off with the positional battle and look at what is unquestionably the single most important escape to the rear mounted position, the sliding elbow escape. So we have Mateus behind us. He's got two hooks in, and we'll start the situation with a seatbelt grip, since it's probably the single most common method of gripping and controlling people in the modern sport of jiu-jitsu from this position. From here, we always want to start with inside thumb position. If you just see, you'll see that my thumb is inside Mateus's wrist, right in that area that you would slash if you wanted to kill yourself. So we take our thumb and put it in just like so. He goes to lock up, and we maintain inside thumb position. Often I reinforce that with outside position with my other hand. Now this means that anytime Mateus goes to switch to a stranglehold, he will be directly challenged by my inside thumb position. So once a guy locks this seatbelt in place, what I don't want is him progressing from a seatbelt to my lapels. Now he's already dangerous in this position. The moment he gets a hold of my lapel, he's significantly more dangerous. He's close to finishing me now. So as soon as I see a seatbelt, the first thing we want to do is we want to challenge his wrist with inside thumb position. Now if he goes to make a transition, it's going to be quite difficult for him, and I'll have time to hit my escapes. So having monitored the wrist with our inside thumb position, now it's time to break the connection of his chest to our back. That's always our goal. We want to turn and face our opponent. He's currently behind me. That's a huge advantage for Mateus and a terrible disadvantage for me. So we need to address that immediately. The first question is, which way am I going to go? How am I going to make my body go from chest to back to chest to chest? Well, I need to choose a side. A good solid choice to begin with is to go away from my opponent's strangle hand. You'll see that Mateus's strangle hand points in this direction. I always want to go in the same direction my opponent's strangle hand is pointing. Now, how do I do this? If I need to fall to my left, doesn't Mateus know that we need to fall to the right? Who's going to win in a battle between who wants to fall left or right? Mateus wants to go right, I want to go left. How do we know who wins that battle? If Mateus goes to take me in this direction, it's difficult for him to do so. Why? Because Mateus doesn't have any contact with the floor with his feet, but I do. So when it's time for a battle for direction, even though Mateus has the positional advantage, I do have one advantage over Mateus. I've got direct contact with the floor with my feet. Mateus doesn't. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to create what we call a brace leg, like so. When Mateus goes to fall in this direction, my brace leg makes it impossible. Now I take my head towards his shoulder. So even if his head is forward in a good position, I put a brace leg and I put my head on the opposite side. Now watch my left leg. I point my toes outwards and I just straighten my left leg. So my power leg, my brace leg pushes and my other leg straightens. And as a result, we always win the battle as to who falls in which direction. The defensive man should always be able to fall in the direction he wants rather than what the offensive man wants, because he's the one with his feet on the floor. Okay, I'll repeat this again because it's a very important point. Okay, we know that one side is preferable to fall towards, so it's a big deal that we get the chance to determine which side we fall towards. What I don't want is just to have my legs passive in this situation, so that when Mateus falls to the side he wants, I just passively fall with him. Okay, it's not a good thing. If Mateus makes me fall to that side, he's going to have to do something to earn it. I'm not just going to give it to him for free. So we create a brace leg. Okay, so it's hard for him to fall to the side he desires. And then from here, watch how I just straighten out my second leg as I push off my right, make a strong resistant body, Mateus. No matter how hard he tries to resist me, it's so easy for me to determine which side we go towards. Okay, now we've fallen to the side we want. The next big question is, how are we going to work our way out of here and actually turn and face him? Well, the first step is to beat my training partner's feet. You will notice by falling to one side, I have created a bottom foot and a top foot. One of my opponent's feet is now higher than the other. I always want to attack the bottom foot. So from here, I'm going to take my leg and I'm going to straighten it. And as a result, it's very easy for me to go over my opponent's bottom foot. Put that foot back in, Mateus. Even if Mateus is hooking tight into my hips and not giving me anything here for free, it's relatively easy for me to start that action of sweeping my leg around the corner and turning my hips so that I can start the process of going over his bottom foot. Once we get over the bottom foot, we're starting to look good. Even as Mateus brings his head forward to stop me getting my head to the mat, I'm now going to go to the next phase of our escape. I've escaped the bottom foot. The next thing for me to do is to get my head to the floor. So even though Mateus has good head position, look how one big advantage I have here, even though I'm the defensive guy, is I can always bring my head forward. And as a result, I can win the battle for head position. Mateus always wants his head lower than my head. That's what he wants. I want my head in the lower position. So our first battle was for the foot. Our next battle is for head position. I bring my head forward and around, and I put my head underneath Mateus's head. There's no reason now why I can't start the action of walking my body out. I stand on Mateus's foot right here so that he can't reclaim his foot position. If he was able to get his knee in front and get his foot in position, that'd be good for him and bad for me. So I take my foot and I stand on top of his foot. And as a result, I can start to move away. And now the critical demarcation point. I'm going to take my right arm and I'm going to get my right elbow to the floor. Here's a word for you guys. If you can get your right elbow to the floor between you and him, you are out. You have escaped. So what we're going to do is take our elbow down towards the floor like so. Have confidence that as I continue moving out and my elbow touches the mat, there is no more strangle now. Even if Mateus got a hold of my two lapels and tried to strangle me in this position, the angle is wrong. There's no effective strangle from this angle. Okay? And as a result, we're now in a position where we can focus entirely on putting him back in guard. If Mateus was naive and just stayed where he was, there's no reason why I can't frame on my training partner's hips and from here start turning into him and taking top position. So from Mateus's perspective, his best move now is to try and get up on top of me. So we're going to place our foot inside his knee, just like so. And as Mateus takes what he thinks is top position, we now find ourselves in a situation where we can now go forward and start reclaiming guard position. Here I've chosen butterfly guard. You could have chosen closed guard too, whichever one you favor. So let's have a look at this again. We're trying to break this down into a series of steps and battlefields, okay? The first battlefield is over your opponent's strangle hand, okay? Let's understand that my opponent has two hands. This is his strangle hand. That's the one which ultimately, because it's over my shoulder, will strangle me. This one here is under my arm. It's very difficult for my opponent to use this effectively as a strangle in itself. Okay, there's some evidence to show that this is possible under certain kinds of circumstances, but it's a long story. As a general rule, the arm that goes underneath my arm is used primarily for control. Okay, and it is not typically used for strangulation purposes. So this is the one, the strangle hand, which is dangerous to me. Okay, that's the one I want to monitor. So when someone locks a seatbelt, our first battle is for inside thumb position here. That area of the wrist where you would slash yourself if you wanted to kill yourself, we would take our thumb and place it in like so. So when he locks a hold, we monitor that inside thumb position. Once we've got inside thumb position, now we don't have to worry so much about the strangle. If my opponent started fiddling around for my lapels now, it would be difficult for him to do so because I monitor his hand successfully. So the first battle is inside thumb position. Once we've satisfied that, the next battle is for direction. Which way are we going to fall? Matthias wants me to fall to the right. I don't want to be passive. I don't want my legs to be limp and he falls to the right and I just follow. Okay, that's good for him and bad for me. So instead, I want to be proactive here. I want to determine which side the two of us fall. I got good news and bad news. The bad news is he's behind you, so he's winning this fight. He scored 4 points, he's got hooks in, and he could potentially strangle you in this position. The good news is you're the only one with feet on the mat. Okay, and we've got to use that to our advantage. So from here, we're going to put out a brace leg, and we're going to turn and straighten the other leg. So we've had 2 battles so far. We won the battle for inside thumb position at the wrist, and we won the battle for direction. Now the next phase of the battle is head position. Matthias wants his head lower than mine. Okay, and as a result, it's hard for me to get down to the floor. So the next battle is head position. I take his hands towards my sternum so that my head can move forward. The higher Matthias's hands go, the more difficult it is for me to move my head. So my whole thing is to keep his hands down here by the sternum. Now he can put his head as far forward as he wants. It means nothing. I can always rotate my head all the way through and get my head lower than Matthias's head. Once my head touches the floor, now it's all about us beating his bottom hook. So I point my knee at the ceiling and I start that action of stepping over the hook. Sometimes I'll step over the hook first and then win the battle for head position second. I leave that up to you and the circumstances you're in. Now, once we start getting to here, we start standing on a foot and moving out to the side. Now, the next big battle is for elbow position. Okay, I want my elbow on the floor as a frame between the two of us. That will signify that I'm now facing my opponent. Matthias is still partially on my back. But as I move out and I take my elbow inwards and touch the floor, you are now officially facing your opponent. That's the critical demarcation line that tells you as an athlete it is now safe to work with your opponent. Okay, I don't have to worry about a strangle now, even if he got my lapel. The angle's all wrong for strangulation. Okay, so now we are now facing our opponent. Okay, the next danger is he will get on top of us, and that's when elbow escaping starts to kick in. So I'm going to take my left foot and I'm going to put it as a butterfly hook underneath my training partner's leg. Even as Matthias comes up on top of me now, he comes up into a butterfly hook. And as a result, it's relatively simple for us to recover guard of any given kind. We could go in for closed guards, you could go in for open guards. I leave that up for you. So, again, we have an opponent behind us, and he's done a good job of going through and getting to a position where he has 2 hooks in. He scored points. He secured the seatbelt grip, which is an excellent way to maintain chest-to-back contact. And there's a real danger now. He's going to start switching off into a stranglehold. Okay, that's a serious problem. So from here, we're going to take inside thumb position, and we're going to win the battle for inside thumb position. Then from here, we're going to win the battle for direction. We put up a post leg and drive to the mat. Now from here, we're going to make a choice. We can either fight the hook first by bringing legs together and going over the top, or you can fight the head first by bringing the hands to the sternum, your head goes forward, and you get the lower head position. If you're going to go in that order, hook in tight, buddy, from here, then we'll just point our knee at the floor and go over the hooks. So now we've defeated the hooks, we've defeated the head. There's no real danger of strangle because we have inside thumb position. Now the next big thing is to fully turn and face our opponent. Your critical demarcation line is signified so clearly by your elbow position. If your elbow touches the floor between you and your opponent, you are officially facing your opponent and most of the danger is past. So we're going to fight now to slide our hips out and get our elbow down towards the floor. Now, stop right there. Take your hands apart. The camera can clearly show you my elbow is touching the mat. Okay, that's always what I'm looking for. That tells me in crystal clear terms the back danger is over. And now a new danger has emerged. The new danger is that Mateus will get on top of me. If he throws his foot over my hip and comes up on top, he is now going from rear mount to top mount. And I've gone from one bad position to another. Okay? So once our elbow touches the floor, the new danger is no longer strangles from the back. The new danger is the mounted position. So from here, we're going to shift our hips out and we're going to bring our knee to our chest. So as Mateus climbs into top position, he climbs onto my hooks. As he comes up on top, we're in a position where we can use our legs constructively and start going into situations where now we can play a good attacking game from bottom position. This is an excellent way to understand exactly what you're trying to achieve in this potentially rather scary situation. Your opponent's behind you with a rear mount in a position where he could potentially strangle you. Break it down into these step-by-step battles and you'll get out of a lot of these potentially dangerous positions. Now, let's look at the same move that we just looked at, but with a massive complication. This time the guy's actually strangling you. Okay, he's got his hands in your lapel and he's starting to strangle you. This is where things get interesting. Not only are you in a full rear mounted position, this guy's threatening to put you out. So, in the previous move, my opponent had a seatbelt. That's one thing. A seatbelt is excellent for purposes of control, but it's not particularly dangerous because his hands are locked together. If his hands are locked together, that means he's not strangling me. So, this time, a little different. He has opened up my lapel and he's inserted a strangle hand. Okay, his second hand has a bunch of different options. Some people will grab you by the hand. Some people will grab the opposite lapel. Other people will be looking to grab the gi pans. All three are excellent options. I'm going to look at a situation where he goes for the second lapel. Okay, that creates arguably the tightest strangulation. We'll be talking about this a lot when we specialize at strangulations, but that's arguably the best of the three options. There's pros and cons to each. Now, what are we going to do in this situation? Okay, he's behind, he's got hooks in, and you're seconds away from getting rendered unconscious. Our whole thing now is elbow position. We need to take his elbow in front of our shoulder. Let's understand that if his elbow goes behind my shoulder, I am starting to strangle. Even that will be enough to put me out, but things can potentially get even worse when my opponent takes his legs across my hip, throws his leg over my shoulder, and now I'm really in trouble. Okay? So you can see what's happening here. The more my opponent progresses to an angle and the elbow goes behind the shoulder, the worse things are getting. By the time he reinforces his position with his leg, it's almost impossible for me to even access his elbow, and I'm done. So it's very, very important. The minute someone gets into a lapel, we want to take a four-finger grip here and pull the elbow forward so I can access the upper arm. So I have a left-hand grip on his lower arm and a right-hand grip on his upper arm. And as a result, I can keep his elbow in front. The next danger is that my opponent will start to form an angle on me where he can get his leg over my shoulder and use his right leg to strip my arm away and pin it. And then I'm truly in hot water. So once we get this grip, this is not the time for delay. I'm not going to say you have to panic and set a speed record, but you don't want to be hanging around either. This is not the situation where procrastination helps you. You lock up, we get the elbow in front of our shoulder and lock it in just like so. Now, as my opponent goes to work the angle and strangle, we are going to look always to move our body down to the side like so. Now, from this position, look, our head position becomes extremely important. I pull down on his elbow and keep it in front of my shoulder so I can get my head position down to the mat. Then I go to beat my training partner's bottom foot. I have to have confidence at this point that as I turn in on my training partner and I get my elbow to the floor, the strangle is now rendered ineffective. Even as Mateus goes to apply the stranglehold now, the angle is incorrect and I can always turn into it like so. And as a result, I can start bringing my legs in front. As he tries to come up on top of me in these situations, our legs come into a good defensive position. And from here, we can always use the various techniques we want to go into good attacking positions from bottom. Once again, we have an opponent who sunk a strangle hand in. As soon as we see that, we take a 4-finger grip and we get control of our training partner's upper arm and the lower arm. My right arm controls his upper arm, my left hand controls his lower arm. Now from this position, we're always looking to turn everything over to the side. I can't delay and let him get everything over my shoulder, including his right leg. That's a bad thing. We don't want that happening. So from here, we start that action of going over his bottom leg. We start turning into our training partner, standing on his foot if necessary. And then we start coming out to the side and fighting to get our elbow down towards the floor. Now as he tries to come up on top of me, we have different options here. I can put him back in half guard. I can then elbow escape out of half guard and put him back in a full guard. Whether you elect to go to a full closed guard or to a butterfly guard, I leave that up to you. The main thing is you get those two knees back in front of him and get into a defensive position where you can save yourself and go back on the attack. Now, let's go further into this rear mount situation. So far, we've been winning the battle for direction and we've been falling to the more desirable side to escape. A natural thing to ask here is, what if I end up falling in the opposite direction? Okay, we know that as our opponent gets in here and goes to work and secures a strangle hand, as much as possible, we want to come through here and control our training partner's arm. Often, you will feel in situations like this, your opponent will go to adjust his strangle hand as he feels the elbow has not been adequately grounded. And there will be opportunities for us to start getting hands back inside. There will be opportunities for us to control the hand like so. And for whatever reason, we are now able to slide down our training partner's body and pass the arm across and hold it in place just like so. Under these circumstances, it's fine for us to fall in this direction and start to move out. From here, even as he keeps his hooks in, look, I just by pointing my body up at the ceiling. When my knees point to the ceiling, you'll always beat that bottom hook. Let's have a look at that important detail again. Whenever someone has a hook in and I fall to a given side, if my knees point across the mat, I never beat the bottom hook. But if I turn my hips and point my knees at the ceiling, you always beat the bottom hook very easily. Now from here, we start turning in on our training partner. I generally recommend in these situations, as always, we fight to get our elbow down to the mat, just like so. But we have something of an advantage in this situation. When we both go to get up together, I'm sitting on Mateus's bottom leg this time. And when we both go to get up, I just put my hand on his hip. He goes to get up, I go to get up. You always end up getting up on top of your opponent and reversing the position. So on this side, I generally recommend you get up on top of him. You'll probably end up in his guard or half guard. That's fine. Much better than where you were before. So my opponent goes in behind and we secure our training partner's hand. I feel, because I got an early grip on my training partner, bear in mind guys, I'm gripping outside the gi. We're not allowed to put fingers inside the cup. That's an illegal grip and not a particularly effective one either. So we always grip outside just like so. Now, when we go to control our training partner's arm, we slide down the body, and as a result, I can elevate the arm just enough that I can go under it. Try to avoid this kind of thing. It's just not realistic to lift people's arms and go under. That's just not going to happen in a live situation. So our whole thing here is to slide down the body. I create just enough pressure, Loctite, that I can get his elbow just high enough that I can go under the arm. It's not so much that I lift the arm, it's more about me going under the arm. Now, from this position, I point my knee at the ceiling, and as a result, I can easily start moving on through and over to the side. As always, as I move out, I'm looking to get my elbow to the floor. If he's quicker and more athletic than me, I just put my feet in the inside position, and now we're in a good position to go back on the attack. If I feel, as we come out of the position, because I'm sitting on his leg, there's a good opportunity for me to come on top, then I'll heist into the top position. Okay, whether you end up on top or bottom, so long as you're facing him and you're not in a situation where you're in any kind of danger, you've done much better than where you were before. Be happy with that as an escape. Now, let's look at another version of the rear mount. Always remember, the rear mount has two variations: face up and face down variations. When I began jiu-jitsu, we were always taught different kinds of escape based upon whether we were face up to the ceiling or face down. So if my opponent is behind me, both of us were face up, like so. This would be a face up rear mount situation. Another kind of rear mount situation is one where my opponent is on top of me with two hooks in, and from here, this is also rear mount, and he can put considerable pressure on my opponent, on my body here, and finish. Now, I could show you a bunch of escapes that I learned over the years, especially when I was young, from this position. There's ways to manipulate my legs and elbow escape out of this position. I could show them to you. However, I would be acting in bad faith if I did show you those moves, because the truth is I have no confidence in them. When I look around my own gym, my own experience, and international competition over the last 20 years, I think I can count on one hand the number of people who got out of situations like that against someone their own size and their own skill level in top level competition, or even just in gym sparring. It's very, very difficult to get out of rear mounted position if you're just flattened out on your belly. My approach is, it's pretty easy, even when you're flattened out, to get back up to a turtle position. What I do and what I advocate to my athletes is, if you find yourself in a situation where you're prone, face down, with hooks in, get up to turtle position and do a forward roll, so that your weight is on top of him as you go to escape. Escaping rear mount is already a very difficult thing to do under the best of circumstances. It's a hell of a lot worse when not only is he rear mounted on you, he's got his body weight on top of you as well. So I'm going to show you the approach which I favor, and it might seem a little strange or unorthodox, but I've always had good success with it. We're going to start off with a guy who's got two hooks in, like so. Now, traditional methods of escape here involve me flattening out to a belly down position and then elbow escaping out of this position. And as I said, I could teach you it, but I would be acting in bad faith if I did, because I personally don't believe in it. I've seen very, very few people use it successfully against someone their own size and skill level. So what I do in these situations is I just stay in turtle position. Your opponent will be trying to flatten you out from here. He knows it's a good thing to flatten you out. So he's going to want to go under your arms and lock on, just like so, and start putting pressure on. Whenever I see this, I'm just going to put my head on the floor, and I'm going to hit a forward roll, so that we now find ourselves in the same rear mount position we were in before, and we can employ all the same escapes. So, if we're here, in a situation where I'm chest down towards the mat, and my opponent goes in and gets a hold of me, I'm going to gather my opponent up. As he goes to stretch me out, all I do is I just take my body up and we hit a simple forward roll from this position. And as a result, we now find ourselves in exactly the same situation that we were in for the previous escapes. We know what to do. We're now in a situation where we can easily take a foot, create a brace leg, turn our body down to the side, and from this position, we start fighting the battle for head position. Or alternatively, we start going over our training partner's hooks and then fighting the battle for head position. Once we start moving our body out, we often stand on our training partner's foot, bring our elbow down between us. From here, as my opponent tries to get up on top, he finds himself getting put either in closed guards or butterfly guards, and then from here we go back on the attack. So my general spiel in these situations is just hit a forward roll, and then you'll find yourself using exactly the same escapes that we saw in the previous sequence. Now here's something interesting for you. You can even hit a forward roll when the guy doesn't have his hands underneath you. Even if Mateus had hooks in and he had his two hands on the floor, that would not stop him from the forward roll. The forward roll here is an exceptionally powerful instrument because it goes out at an angle away from his base. Okay, so even if he hooks in tight to my hips and goes to stop himself, even from here, the forward roll will still be effective. In fact, it'll be even more effective because now he doesn't have chest and back, and as a result, we can start moving out even more easily. Okay. Regardless of whether my opponent has hands on floor, hands underneath, chest or back, or what have you, it doesn't matter. The forward roll will always create a situation where you end up in the more desirable chest up rear mount situation, where your body weight is on top of his, and then we hit the same sliding elbow escape that we saw in the earlier sections, and we get on out of there. Now, let's switch our focus. We're still escaping from the back, but no longer the rear mount. Now it's escaping from a closely related position, turtle position. Here, our opponent does have our back, but he does not yet have hooks in. And we're in a situation where we're facing down towards the floor instead of facing up towards the ceiling. Our primary concern whenever we're defending turtle position goes in two directions. You want to stop your opponent from getting strangleholds. Okay, when we work with the jacket on, Mateus is out to my right hand side. I can be in turtle position. He can have no hooks in, but he can still strangle me very effectively from here. There's all kinds of strangles that we'll be looking at later on in this series, where he can be very, very effective indeed, strangling without the hooks. Okay, so we've got to constantly monitor the danger of strangleholds in these situations. The other element here is that as my opponent is behind, I need to defend hooks. I can't be naive and start creating space where my opponent can easily start throwing hooks in on my body and scoring points. Okay, and then the third element is we've got to actually face our opponent. We've got to turn and face him chest to chest and hopefully put him back in some kind of guard position. Let's look at a range of ways of dealing with turtle position. The first one is a little bit different in its conceptual form. You guys know that most of the time I'm advocating an approach where our escapes lead back to the guard position. I believe that's the most high percentage way in most situations. But we're going to start our turtle defense where we actually roll and pin our opponent and end up in a side pin. This is basically a makikomi or rolling method of attack. The time we use this is when our opponent has a tight waist grip. Remember, the various escapes that we use to turtle position will be assessed by how my opponent is holding me. If my opponent has a seatbelt grip, I'll go into one kind of escape. If my opponent has two arms underneath locked, that's another kind of escape. If my opponent has a single arm around my waist, this will create another kind of escape. Okay, it will require another kind of escape. We're going to look first at a situation where my opponent has a so-called tight waist grip, where I'm in a turtle situation like so, and he has one hand around. He can be gripping the gi, like so, or he can just have his hand here around my waist. Okay, from here his body will be on one side of my body and his tight waist on the other, and from here we're going to have to learn to escape. Okay, the method we're going to look at first is the makikomi method. Let's start off with a little bit of theoretical background here about the makikomi. Let's start off facing towards the camera, and my training partner will be behind me and have the tight waist grip, and for now we'll have the other hand on the floor just like so. From a turtle situation like this, my opponent's left foot will be up and he'll be covering my hips in the traditional fashion just like this. Let's understand that my opponent has a certain base of support and I need to take him away from that base of support. My opponent's left foot is one of his main bases of support. If I trap his arm in here and lock it in place, I don't want to roll directly to my left, because if he extends his left foot out as a base of support, when I go to roll him, I roll into his base of support. And it's very, very difficult for me to take him over. Let's understand that his base of support can only come forward up to an area out to my side, perpendicular to me like so. Can't really go beyond that. So one area that he won't have any base of support is this trapped arm. The way I trap his arm is very important. I generally don't like to grab hands here. What I do is I just put my wrist over his wrist. Okay? I make sure that I trap him below the elbow. I don't come up here and hold above the elbow. That's not the idea. I come in and I just lock over his wrist. Now, that means that Matheus has no ability to base out with his left arm. He has a base of support with his right hand, which can come all the way up here in front of my head and all the way around here, like so. He's got a base of support on his right knee, and he's got a base of support on his left foot. But one area is this quadrant here, where he has no real base of support, because the one thing he would need to base on that side would be this hand, and I'm controlling it. Now, from here, I'm going to tuck and keep everything in close, like so that I don't let him get his hand into a strangle position on my lapels. So I tuck in, just like so, and I keep my head close to my own shoulder. I'm going to turn my hips out, just like so. I'm going to lock in on my training partner's arm, and from this position, I'm going to extend my left leg. And as a result, I can turn my training partner straight on over. From this position, I look to follow him, and then from here, I get a grip on my training partner's gi pants. Notice I do not go inside the hem of the pants. I hold just here. 4 fingers connect, and we lock in a 4-finger grip. Now from this position, we switch our hips, and we turn in towards our training partner's hips. When Matheus goes to put me back in guard, it's a difficult thing in this situation. If I feel him trying to hook into my legs, I can always adjust my body position in various ways to ensure we stay in a tight pin. It's difficult for Matheus to go into any kind of elbow escape here, because I'm still controlling the arm that he requires to frame with and form an elbow escape. Very often under these circumstances, we can bring our elbow up to the armpit. I make my hips high over his. I release my training partner's wrist, and I slap his 2 legs together, and we end up forward into the mounted position. Let's have the sequence again. Whenever my opponent is out to my side, we quickly ascertain that he has 4 potential bases of support in this situation. His left foot covers a quadrant around here. It can come advancing forward like so. It can go further back, and it covers the quadrant from directly behind me to out here to perpendicular. This hand covers a quadrant from directly out here all the way potentially up to a 12 o'clock position like so. And his right foot covers a quadrant from 3 o'clock all the way back to 6 o'clock. The one area where he doesn't have a base of support is the quadrant that goes from 12 to 9 over here. And that's ultimately what we're looking to control. I lock in on my training partner's wrist. When he tries to yank the arm out, I turn my body so that his elbow gets caught in the geometry of my rib cage. Now from here, my head goes down, and I just extend my leg back, and as a result, we end up in a good pin across our training partner's side. Now my elbow comes up to his armpit. I switch my base, and I bring my hips higher than his hips. I release his arm, bring his 2 knees together, and we step forward and into the mounted position. Once again, from a situation where my opponent's gotten in behind me. From here, I go through and I capture my training partner's wrist, just locking it in like so. Now I take advantage of that upper quadrant and extend my legs. As we turn our training partner through, we end up in the perfect pinning position. When he goes to put us back in guard, it won't be easy from here. Now, elbow comes high to the armpit, our hips go high over his, and we slap his 2 legs together. Then from here, we find ourselves in the perfect mounted position, ready to go. Let's look at it from another angle. My opponent's left hand potentially could cover this area of the quadrant in terms of base. He could take their hand out and base out if I wasn't controlling it, okay? Even if my opponent extends his foot out to cover the quadrant area here, it wouldn't mean anything when I start turning the corner. And as a result, when we go through and extend, that's how we start taking people over and into good position, okay? I often make use of this Makikomi roll. You will find that some of your opponents will quickly figure out when the arm gets trapped, they're going to get rolled, and they will often engage in the following kind of behavior. When they feel there's a danger of me trapping the arm, they will violently rip their arm free and lose. When they do that, they lose contact with me. So I lost the Makikomi roll, but I gain an ability now to go into a different form of roll, the shoulder roll. And once again, we're back in a position where now we can go back on the attack. So I often play the Makikomi roll off against the shoulder roll. I have a Makikomi to my left and a shoulder roll to my right. Okay, so the general rule is a Makikomi always goes away from my opponent and a shoulder roll goes into my opponent. So from here we go around the corner. I try hard for the Makikomi and my opponent violently pulls his arm free. Immediately we come up and over, and from here we find ourselves back in a position where we can go back on the attack with our training partner. This is the Makikomi, a very useful way of starting the ball rolling when we're defending a turtle position. Now, let's look at what is one of the most popular and one of the most effective escapes to a turtle situation where my opponent has a tight waist grip. Remember, one of the great themes of our escape series is the idea that there are escapes which are appropriate for a given grip and inappropriate for others. If my opponent has a seatbelt grip, this is not the time to be shoulder rolling. Okay, only a fool would shoulder roll under these circumstances. If we're down here close to the mat and Mateus has a seatbelt grip and I hit a shoulder roll, then from here he will actually just roll with me, and I've actually given him what he wanted. He gets hooks in. The time for shoulder rolling is usually when your opponent has a tight waist grip, where he's around your waist and holding with one hand, like so. This is the best time to hit it. It can also be even easier when my opponent, for whatever reason, has relinquished the grip, or maybe it's because I forced it out or what have you, and he no longer has an effective grip on us. Under these circumstances, the shoulder roll is the perfect means of escape back to guard position. Now, I'm going to talk first about just the mechanics of the shoulder roll. I'll do that one by myself, Mateus, and we'll just look at what's involved in a successful shoulder roll. When you first start off shoulder rolling, it can be a very frustrating experience. It's usually because of inadequacies in the manner in which people roll. I will often see beginning students, let's have an imaginary opponent out to our right hand side. We always shoulder roll towards our opponent. Okay, so here we are, he's out to my side. You'll see people go into a shoulder roll where they come up and then they collapse onto a hip. And that's a disaster, because now your opponent is literally across your side and you're underneath his weight, facing in the wrong direction. Okay, so we can't have that. What we need in any kind of effective shoulder roll scenario is an ability to build our hips up over our head. You will know you are performing a shoulder roll correctly when at the height of the shoulder roll, your head is symmetrically placed between your own knees. If your head is not symmetrically placed between your knees, you are in a position of mechanical disadvantage and you will not be able to complete the roll. The only way I can carry my opponent's weight in this position is when my head is directly between my own knees. And then from here, we can easily put an opponent back in guard. So our whole thing is to create a progression where we have an imaginary opponent out to our right-hand side, and we're going to put our shoulder either in front of us or alongside of us. And from here, I come up on toes, and we push, and we separate our feet. Then from here, we rotate until my head is symmetrically between my knees. At this point, I can easily bring my feet in and put my opponent back in guard. If you try to put your opponent back in guard before your head is symmetrically placed between your knees, you will always end up with inadequate results. If, for example, I commit down here, and you can see that my head is not between my knees. When I go to put him back in guard, he can easily brush my legs to the side and throw my legs into a kind of leg drag position, and we end up in a dreadful situation. Remember, you will have to do this with your opponent's body weight on top of you. That means you're going to have to bear your opponent's body weight as you attempt the roll. The only way I can hold an opponent's body weight is when my head is symmetrically positioned between my knees. Let's talk too about some other elements that might throw you off in your beginning stages. Often I see people hit a shoulder roll with a knee on the mat. Okay? You cannot hit an effective roll until your knees leave the mat. And that means both of them. I see people keep one knee on the mat and one knee off the mat, and then when they go to roll, that's the inevitable result. It's important that we take our knees off the floor. From this situation, now it's just a matter of walking our body into that symmetrical position where we can put our opponent back in guard. Whenever we go to work with any kind of shoulder roll, most of your body weight, and interestingly most of his body weight, will be borne on one of your shoulders. So as I go down to the floor, most of my weight goes onto my right shoulder, but that's going to change as we go further into the roll. As I go into a position of extension, the whole idea is to transfer weight from my right shoulder onto my scapula, so that now both of my shoulders are free. I should be able to use both of my hands to push on my opponent to work my way out of this position. And then from here, that will help me generate space to put my opponent back in guard. Now, let's start doing this with a partner and look at how it will work in a competitive setting. We have an opponent who's gotten behind us, and we see that his grip is one of tight waist. Remember, if my opponent comes over the top and locks his seatbelt, this is not the time for shoulder rolling. There's better things we can do here, much better. So, from this general situation, I don't want to hit my shoulder roll with Mateus covering my hips. As long as my hips are covered, this is a bad time to hit shoulder rolls. So we're going to take our hand across. This is just a general safety feature. You might just call this just straightforward defensive responsibility. If Mateus is out to my right hand side, my left hand will go across to my scapula. Okay? Across to my collarbone. So as my opponent tries to come in for a stranglehold, I'll always be ready to block him. Okay? You've always got to be defensively responsible like that. Now, from this position, I'm going to bring my shoulder down towards the floor and turn my 2 feet outwards. Remember, he's starting off covering my hips. I cannot hit a shoulder roll while he's covering my hips. I'll rephrase that. It's undesirable. You can hit a shoulder roll with covered hips, but it's not what you're looking for. So I start by covering my neck and taking my legs out to the side. Now my whole thing here is to come up so my 2 knees come up off the floor. He's still got his tight waist in place. Okay? So it's my hips against his tight waist. My hips must go behind his tricep here. If he pushes down with his elbow, he can flatten me out. That's why my right leg must be strong. When he goes to flatten me out, it's my right leg that supports me. My whole thing now is to start an action of rolling in behind his tricep muscle, so that our weight goes on the back of his arm. And in this position, we can start to push in. My opponent's armpit is the target. As he pulls his arm out to face me, my legs come back to an inside position, and from here, we're going to be in a situation where we can come up and get into a counter-offense situation like so. So once again, we have an opponent. He's out here behind us. I notice he has a tight waist grip. Look how we start by swishing our legs out. He no longer covers my hips. Now we're in the perfect position to take our 2 legs and come up just like so. I roll with my intention to point my hips directly towards his armpit. And as a result, we get an opportunity now as he turns to face us to put him back in some form of guard position. Once again, Our opponent's in behind us. Defensive responsibility first. We always come in and cover this side of the body. Okay, so if he went for any kind of strangulation grip, you'd be able to get inside thumb position. Now we start the action of turning the corner, just like so. My feet swish her out, and now we're in the perfect position to come up onto our shoulders and go through. My whole intention here is to roll my hips in towards the back of his armpit, and that's going to make it very easy for us to put a weight on top of his legs as he turns to face us. Now we find ourselves back in a variation of close guard. Let's go further with this now and look at the idea of posting hands on our training partner's elbows. As my opponent goes to control me with the tight waist, very often from here, as we swish our feet out, there's going to come a tough battle here with our training partner's elbow versus our hips. I will often use a thumb post. I take my thumb and I post inside my training partner's elbow. As he tries to hold my hips, I'm going to push on the elbow and expose his armpit. And as a result, I can lock behind the armpit, bring my second leg around the corner, and lock up a closed guard. Okay. Some details on the shoulder roll will come up close to the camera so you can see these. Essentially, a shoulder roll is a battle between my hips and my opponent's arm. Okay, in theory, I should be able to win that battle most of the time. The hips are one of the strongest structures of the human body. The arm is among the weaker ones. Now, as Mateus comes in behind me, look out first. I've got to get away from his hips. Okay, I don't want to roll directly underneath him. I get caught up on his hips. So our first thing is to swish our feet out. Now from here, we start building a structure where we come onto one shoulder and across to the other. You can see what's happening here. Mateus is trying to stop me with his elbow. So I take my thumb and I put it inside Mateus's elbow and I start that action of pushing so that I can expose his armpit to my guard. And from here, the legs come in and we're in business now, looking for our counter offense from bottom position. Nothing more frustrating than coming into a good roll and getting stopped in this position. As he hooks on here, it's a fight between his elbow pushing down, like so, versus my legs pushing up. As soon as I feel I need to get my head symmetrically between my knees, the way for me to do this is to separate. There's my head in that symmetrical position. And as a result, we can go through now and into a good defensive position down on the floor. We're always looking, that's why it's so important, we're always looking for that ability to thumb post and push. So if we have a solo drill this time, very often I will take my body down here and I will practice when I do this by myself, pushing at the hip. I should be able to push, push, push until my head goes into that symmetrical position between my knees. And then from here, we can easily put him back in guard. Seen from another angle, Mateus is here on my right. Look how we take our feet out, and there is our initial shoulder roll. There's my hand, my thumb post, I push, and my hips slide underneath his armpit. Only when my hips go under the armpit am I in a position to go around the corner and lock up the various guards that we could do there. Whether you choose to go back to a closed guard or open guard, I leave that up to you. As a general rule, in IBJJF situations, I generally counsel my students to go back to a closed guard, and in submission grappling context, where leg locks are legal, I typically have them pommel their feet to an inside position for safety purposes. Let's look one more time at the critical battle that goes on in any shoulder roll. The critical battle is the battle between your hips and his elbow. You need to be able to get your hips underneath his armpit by elevating his elbow. If your opponent is naive, there's not much of a battle. If his elbow position is weak, then from here, it's pretty easy for us just to go directly into the roll. And you see, as his armpit gets exposed, it's easy for you to get position. Things become more problematic when my opponent has a good tight waist and he's tight there with the elbow joint. From this position, look how I come up, and now it's that battle between his elbow trying to push down and my hips trying to come up off the floor. Now we add the idea of a thumb post,
and we start pushing in here. I'm looking to expose his armpit. As I push up, there's the exposed armpit. I'm trying to roll my hips under his armpit. And that's the entry point. Once my hips go under the armpit, now we end up in a position where we can go on the attack.
Now, we're defining the idea of a shoulder roll escape as essentially a battle between my hips and my opponent's elbow. Okay, he's got a tight waist grip, and we're trying to come up onto our shoulders and scapula and put him back in guard. That's the battleground that's being fought over here. I want to give you a trick which I often employ whenever I go into shoulder roll escapes, and this is the technique of using hand control to put my opponent's hand in my back pocket. If I can do this, it's much easier for me to hit a successful shoulder roll escape from turtle situations. So we have Mateus out to our right hand side, and from here, normally my right hand, I'm defensively responsible by taking my hand up and to protecting my lapels like so. So if he goes digging in for my lapels, I can stop him. Okay, but on occasions I will use my right hand to monitor his hand, and if I feel I can do that, I will often do a trick where I seize my training partner at the knuckle lines of the hands. Okay, so he's got a grip on my waist here. I just take his hand and I put his hand in my back pocket, just like so. That greatly reduces the effectiveness of his tight waist. If his hand is on my belly button and he's holding tight, it feels like he's got a very strong tight waist. Now from this situation, when I put the hand in my back pocket, it's almost impossible for him to stop the shoulder roll, and creates a very easy roll back into a situation where we can get back on the attack. So once again, my opponent's in here, he's got his tight waist grip, and however we do it, from here I get a hold of my training partner's hand and I force the hand around my hamstring towards my back pocket. Now as Mateus goes to hold me in place, it's so much more difficult, and it's so much easier for me to come up and expose that armpit. Okay, there's not much he can do in terms of stopping me off my forward roll. The exposed armpit makes it very easy for me to bring my hips underneath, and then from here we're in the perfect situation now to go in and start hitting our counter offense from bottom position. So it's always a good thing when people are behind us and we're working in situations like this to get a hold of that hand and put it in behind us like so. Now as I go down towards the mat, the push of my legs makes it very easy indeed to go in on my training partner and start to score whichever kind of guard you favor, closed or open. Now we've been looking at a bunch of escapes to turtle position. We started off with Makikomi, an excellent way to roll our opponent, end up in a good pin. We looked at shoulder rolling, an excellent way to roll in the opposite direction and put your opponent back in guard. Everything we've done so far has been against a tight waist grip. Okay, we're defining a tight waist as one where my opponent is in behind me and he has one arm here around my waist like so. Okay, in situations like this, I've got to be careful of my opponent's second hand coming around and forming strangulation grips. So as a general rule, when someone is behind us and they're on our right hand side, our left hand typically comes across and goes in front of my cheek in this position. So as he comes around the corner and looks for strangle grips, he'll always give me the inside thumb position that I'm looking for. And then from this kind of general situation, we're able to hit the various kinds of escapes that we favor and we've looked at so far. We've seen that Makikomi is one great option. I can roll my opponent over and end up on top of him. We've seen that shoulder rolls are a great option. I can roll on the inside shoulder, put him back in guard. Now we're going to look at a grip that my opponent can use, which will make both of those suicidal. We must learn to distinguish between tight waist grips, where the appropriate escapes are shoulder rolls and Makikomi rolls, okay, versus a seatbelt grip. If my opponent locks a seatbelt in this situation, that dramatically changes how I'm going to try to escape. If I try a Makikomi roll now, it's suicide. All Mateus has to do, lock your hands, is put his knee over the other side, and now my Makikomi takes me right into a much worse situation than the rear mount. Okay, so the Makikomi turns into a disaster when my opponent has the seatbelt grip. In addition, shoulder rolling also becomes a disaster. My training partner has a seatbelt grip
I go in, clear his legs away, and I go into the shoulder roll. Now when I try to complete the roll, he just snaps his arms down, and I end up giving him the rear mounted position. Okay, so you can clearly see that those two escapes, Makikomi and shoulder roll, which was so effective against the tight waist grip, are a disaster when they're used inappropriately against a seatbelt grip. So a natural question to ask is, well, if the seatbelt is one of the most popular back control grips in the sport, what are you going to do now? Okay, you can't use Makikomi, can't use a shoulder roll. What are you going to do? Well, first tactic is to try and break the seatbelt. You can have some success with that. I've seen it done. It's not impossible, but it's damn difficult, especially on a guy who knows what he's doing with a seatbelt. Okay, if my opponent is in a seatbelt, okay, and the hands are locked, yes, it's possible. Okay, I'm going to come closer to the camera so you can see some details on this. Let's understand when the seatbelt is employed, he has a top hand and a bottom hand, like so. Some people will lock a palm-to-palm grip on a seatbelt. That will complicate things a little bit. But the standard grip most people employ in seatbelt situations is to lock up like so. It's illegal for me in the sport of jiu-jitsu to start grabbing fingers. This digit manipulation there, that's illegal. However, it is legal for me to grab the entire knuckle line of my opponent's hands, and under certain circumstances like this, it is possible for me to separate hands. I'm not going to say it's impossible. I've seen it done. I've had athletes on who competed against us, and my own athletes compete against them have done this on several occasions, but it's not an easy thing, and it's easily stymied by someone who just switches to palm grips, and now it's much more difficult for me to pull their hands apart. So I'm not a big fan of the idea of just pulling hands apart on people. If you're a very strong, athletically gifted person, that may work for you on occasion, but it's not going to systematically get you out of anybody's seatbelt situation. So let's go to another method, which I do favor. This is the inside leg method. Mateus is going to be out to my left-hand side, and from here he's going to have the seatbelt in place. Now let's understand that Mateus can have his feet and legs in two different configurations. Okay, the first configuration is where he has his right knee next to my tricep and his left leg comes out wide. Okay, this is one very effective configuration using seatbelts. That's a good one. Okay, the second configuration is where he switches his knees and his left knee replaces his right knee, and his left knee goes up behind me over my hips. He'll probably be a little bit further around this way, and his foot will be on the floor. And this is between these two. These are by far the two most popular methods of controlling the turtle position. I would probably say this is the more orthodox method, this hip covering method, and then the tricep wedge method where he comes back and switches his legs. And this is probably a close second for the most popular ways of controlling. So I'll just show those to you. Okay, so just take the turtle position. So let's face this way. Okay, so the two most popular ways of working against turtle position, it's a hip covering method where I lock, my knee covers his far hip, and from here we lock our hands like so. This is one very popular method. Okay, so from this angle you see my knee and my quadricep covers my opponent's hips, and we have our seatbelt on just like so. I'll show you from another angle so you can see my other knee position. My knee goes between his knee and elbow, and from here we lock up just like so. A very popular and very effective way of controlling the back. A second method, also very effective, is me to wedge my knee right behind my training partner's elbow and tricep, and then from here my other leg goes out wide and we lock up the seatbelt like so. And of course we can play between these two methods. They're both very effective. We can play between this and this, and in the blink of an eye we can switch from one to the other. Okay, now given that both are very popular and both are very effective, we've got to know how to get out of both. The method I'm about to show you, the inside leg method, works very well on both. It's slightly easier to apply in the case of a tricep wedge, but it works just fine in both cases. You just have to add an extra step when your opponent covers your hips. I'm going to show it in the slightly more difficult situation first, where my opponent is covering my hips.
Okay, so my opponent's in here. Our first thing, we always want to monitor our training partner's strangle hand. I never want to give that up. Now, from here, I'm going to bring my elbow inside, like so, and I'm going to start an action of turning my head around the corner, as though I wanted to touch my left ear to my training partner's left knee. That immediately creates a situation where Mateus's right knee comes down towards the floor. Now from here, I put my leg up behind my training partner. I take a step over my training partner's body. I take my right knee and I slide it to Mateus's knee. And we're in the perfect position now to start a rolling action that takes him over. You will notice that I have his lower leg trapped. That means that Mateus will not be able to transition to a rear mount as I make the roll. Now, I can't stay here forever. If my opponent has any wherewithal, he will use his other foot to press on my legs and free his leg. The good news is you don't have to spend a lot of time in this position. Okay? As always, whenever we get into a situation like this, I take my inside elbow and I put it on the floor. Now, even if Mateus did get my lapels, it would mean nothing. You can't strangle from this position. The angle is all wrong. As a result, I no longer need to fixate on my opponent's hands. I can devote all of my attention to turning in towards him. He will be interested in recovering top position. So I put my knee to my chest, and as Mateus comes up on top, he comes up directly into the variations of guard, which we can use in a fairly standard fashion. Once again, my opponent is out to my side. I go in and I get a hold of his inside wrist as he locks up like so. I take my elbow inside his knee and my head makes a movement around the corner. Okay? It's hard for me just to hook Mateus's leg from this position. He's covering my hips. So I start by swishing my feet to the outside and I turn my head around the corner. As a result, I'm in a position where I can start reaching for my training partner's leg. And I sit down and hook it. Now, when he tries to pull his leg out, it's impossible. If he tried to jump over my back and take my back, he couldn't do it because I'm holding his leg. And as a result, I can easily roll him over. I can't stay here forever. He will be trying to take his foot out by using the other foot. So, from this situation, I focus on getting my elbow down to the mat. The second my elbow touches the mat, when he tries to strangle me, etc., it's worthless in this position, and I can easily turn inside his strangle. If my opponent was naive and just stayed in this position, I would get up on top. But there will now be a strong battle for top position. So I put my foot inside his thighs, so that even as he comes up into top position, I will be able to create my escape and get back to a position where I can attack from bottom. Let's show it from a different angle. From here, we start off by getting that inside thumb position, which is so valuable. He's currently covering my hips. I take my ear around the corner. From this position, look how I'm in a position now where as his knee comes down towards the floor, I can start an action of stepping and sitting. I take my knee to his knee and lock in place. As he tries to pull his leg out, it's very, very difficult in the time available. And it's very easy to roll him over. Now from here I put my elbow on the floor, I bring my knee to my chest. As he tries to come up on top, we're in the perfect position now to gain the inside position with our feet, and now we're ready to attack from guard position. Done in this way, we can easily put someone back in a guard position, even if they have a tight seatbelt. Now, I'm going to show the same move applied in a situation where he opts for a different form of control, where he wedges the tricep and holds the seatbelt in this position. This is actually an even easier time to use the move because I didn't really need to turn the corner so much anymore. This time he's out to my side. As always, one thing never changes. I always monitor my opponent's strangle hand with my thumb. Now, the distance I have to turn to get to his legs is much less now. It's an easier scenario to work with. The one thing I have to be careful of is that my opponent can use his right leg to catch my arm and go into crucifixes. So that's my major concern now. So I always close my hand inwards. I never expose my wrist to my opponent and make myself vulnerable to an even more damaging situation. So I close the wrist, I turn inside his legs, and from here I start the action of sitting to a hip, and then I just take my knee to his knee and I step over his leg and roll him through. Again, there's a danger he'll try to kick out. So when the time available, when I see him trying to kick out, I just turn my elbow down to the floor. From here, my knee comes up. As he tries to get up on top of me now, we find ourselves in the perfect position to escape and get back to a position where we can get on the attack. Once again, we have an opponent who's got a seatbelt grip. We lock in, and from here I close my wrist. He goes for the crucifix. I always close my wrist. I look around the corner. I bring my left knee to his left knee. I start the action of slouching. As I slouch, his ankle goes away from his buttocks, and as a result, I can step and hook. From here, I dig my elbow to the inside position. As he comes up on top, directly into a guard position. Okay. You'll notice there's a critical detail involved in both of these moves. This is a situation where my opponent's buttocks are taken away from his ankle. Remember, you need to step over his ankle. The only way you can do this is by exposing the ankle, by bringing his weight forward so you can step over it. So, my opponent's wedging the triceps. Look how when I first go in, I bring my head towards his opposite foot. Look how when I slouch down, my training partner's buttocks rise away from his ankle. Now when my left knee comes in, I step over and hook. That was easy because I exposed the ankle. If my opponent's buttocks were down towards the ankle, it would be very difficult for me to hook his foot. So my whole thing is to slouch, and that creates that leg that I'm looking for. And from here, I step in over the top and turn on through. Now, we're in a neutral situation. Neither athlete is on top of the other. There will be a scramble for top position. So I just bring my knee to my chest. As he comes up into top position, the inside position, makes it relatively easy for me to start moving his body weight and getting back on the attack.